Hi, we're continuing our 9/11 series, going from Genesis to Revelation, looking at random encouragement in times of seemingly random chaos. This week we're in 2 Samuel 9:11, where it says, "Then Ziba said to the king, who is David, 'Your servant will do whatever the Lord my king commands his servant to do.' So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons." Well, who are these men, Ziba and Mephibosheth, and what are we supposed to learn from this story? I think it's often difficult to read the Old Testament as we should. It can be very easy to read the Old Testament as moral stories and say that we should not be like the people that Scripture says were bad men or bad women, and we should be like the people that God worked through. And David is obviously called a man after God's own heart in the Old and the New Testament, but he was not always everything he should have been. He was often a gracious man, but not always a man of justice. He was often a loving man, but not always a man who wanted to deal with the truth. And we see that here in Ziba and Mephibosheth, not necessarily in this verse, but in the way it's going to pan out. We're told in the surrounding verses that Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants, and Mephibosheth was lame in his feet. And again, God never inspires trivia in His Word. What is the significance of this, and what are we supposed to glean from it so that we can be people of faith and obedience in Jesus Christ? Well, let's look back and see a pattern in David's life, and then we'll see how this plays out in Ziba and Mephibosheth. All the way back in 2 Samuel 3, Ishbosheth was Saul's son. And if you remember, or if you don't know, you can look and see that Saul was the first king appointed by God. He was kind of a disciplinary answer to prayer to Israel because they wanted to be like other nations. And so they gave them this king who was outwardly impressive, but not much of a man of heart. And then God later anoints David, who is a smaller man, a boy at the time, but a man after God's own heart. And so Saul is always trying to kill David because he knows one day he's going to be king. One day he's going to be king. Well, after Saul dies, Ishbosheth, his son, takes over, and Abner, who is his leader of the army, and serves him very well. Something happens in this Ishbosheth. Maybe he's paranoid like his father Saul used to be, and he accuses Abner of sleeping with one of his concubines, which Abner says, "I'm a righteous man, I've served you, I've not done this." He goes over and defects to David and says, "I'm going to help David become king." Joab, who is the leader of David's army, doesn't know that Abner has defected, but he sees him leaving, and he says, he says to David, "Why didn't you kill this man? He's your enemy." And David says nothing to him. He doesn't tell him that he's come to help David, and Joab goes and deceives Abner and murders him. And 2 Samuel 11, now David keeps Joab on his staff leading the army. He says, "May the curse be on him and his family, but not on me and my rule." He kind of washes his hands of it, but he does nothing to Joab. In 2 Samuel 11, who does David send after Uriah? Uriah being the husband of Bathsheba, with whom David commits adultery. I know this is a soap opera. You can follow it. Just pause the video and go back and look this up yourself. He sends Joab after Uriah and tells him to put him on the front lines where he's most likely to be killed, to cover up the fact that he's had unfaithful relationship or sexual relationship with Bathsheba, and doesn't want Uriah to find out because she's pregnant. He sends Joab to do his dirty work. In 2 Samuel 13, Amnon, who is David's son, rapes Tamar, his half-sister, who is one of David's daughters, who is the full-blooded sister of Absalom, also David's son. And when David hears about it, he's furious, but he only sends Absalom to stay in his own house, and he stays there for a while. But Joab tricks Absalom to coming out, and David says, "If you ever come out, justice will be had." But he does it in a very passive way. And so Joab tricks Absalom because David would do nothing, and Absalom is killed. In 2 Samuel 19, Shimei, who is one of the men who taunted David and ridiculed him and threw things at him when he was run out of town or leaving town because Saul was trying to kill him. Now he comes back to Saul, or to David, excuse me, and says, "Forgive me." He says, "I'm one of your servants. I'm for you now." And David says, "Nobody will die. This is a time of peace." And Mephibosheth comes back at the same time. Now this is 10 chapters after 2 Samuel 9. I know this is a long soap opera, but go back and look for yourself. David says to Mephibosheth, "Why didn't you come out for me? Why weren't you with me?" And it says that you can see that Mephibosheth, remember, who was lame in his feet, had not taken care of his feet from the time that David had left town. He was visibly in mourning for the whole time. It says he hadn't taken care of his hair. So he wasn't trying to live like a king, like Ziba had said. Ziba wanted all of the property for himself, and in 2 Samuel 19, David doesn't confront Ziba, even though Mephibosheth is visibly in mourning, hasn't taken care of his feet, hasn't taken care of his hair, and instead of confronting him, he says to Mephibosheth, "Well, you divide it with Ziba. Y'all take it half and half." That's not justice. That seems to me to be washing his hands of dealing with the difficult truth. In 1 Kings chapter 1, Adonijah, who's another one of David's sons, and it says in the passage, David had never said to him, "Why do you do all the things that you do?" Adonijah says, "I'm going to be king," even though David is the king. And what does David do? Nothing. He doesn't do anything. In 1 Kings chapter 2, when he's dying, David says to Solomon, "You know this Shimei that betrayed me. One day you will have opportunity to mete out justice, and you do it." David was a man, and there's much, much more that we could go into, but I want to keep this video relatively short. David was a gracious king, but he wasn't always a king of justice. He was a loving king, but he didn't always like to lead facing the difficult truths. We've got a lot of stuff going on in the world right now where strong kings in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, in what used to be the king of or the president of Egypt. Now there's uprisings throughout the Middle East. But just like a musical instrument is supposed to be in tune fully with each string, and if they're all in tune, justice and grace, truth and love, there's harmony. But if we fall short, even in one, it affects everything. Our hope is not that we can be like David. It's not our command that God has given. Our hope is that we have a perfect king who is gracious and just. Our hope is that we have a complete king who is loving and truthful. The command is that we follow him, and when we fall, we get back up and we follow him because he is gracious and just, loving and truthful. May God bless you as you continue to seek and serve him.